Welcome back to Media 7, where we are, in a media sense, bridging the gap between the setup and the punchline with comedy Svengali's Kylie Aitchison, Paul Yates and Dave Armstrong. Now, although there sometimes seems to be not much of a present for comedy on New Zealand television, there is certainly a past, as Sarah Daniel explains in this week's Take 2.
New Zealand television comedy. We have a rich and proud history of playing the clown.
You know what pisses me off more than anything in the 25 years that you and I have been doing this, son? I've never seen your face.
Let me through, I'm a doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Let me through, I'm a doctor.
Last night, up north, somebody stole a toilet seat out of the Kaikohe police station. Now the cops got nothing to go on.
From comedians playing egomaniacs.
What was the other criticism? But being too highly paid. Being too high... No, there are some subjects even too sensitive.
To egomaniacs playing comedians.
Bloody access schemes! I said the porch, not the Porsche.
We have a rich and proud history of taking the piss out of ourselves.
That mirror. Yeah, show the musket.
Musket.
Musket. Hey, bang. Drink. Woo!
Jeez, Wayne, you wouldn't know a decent-looking model from a patchwork quilt.
Yes, I would. You can't spread a decent-looking model on your bed.
Not over your bed anyway, mate. You'd have to drop the size of the cot first, wouldn't you?
The precise time is now 8:21 and 27 seconds, if you want to know.
Is the boss in?
No.
Then it's 8 o'clock.
Satire, self-parody, we've been going to town on it for years.
I go to town about once every, or at least once every 5 years. I like to get in there as often as possible. I'm not very keen on the towns at all, in fact, but I mean, a man's got to go in there sometimes and get a few provisions, one or two things that you can't get out of the wool shed or off the neighbour's place.
They might not always be well paid.
Oh, I don't know, Richard. I sometimes think I'm far too highly paid for what I do.
But if it weren't for our comedians, where would we be, eh?
What the was that?
Sarah Daniel with Take 2 there. Now, Paul, you were there watching our audience while that played. The Billy T stuff. Everyone's heard those jokes before, everyone's seen them, and yet we laughed all over again. What is it about? Is it the character in the middle, or...?
I don't know. He just tapped into that kind of New Zealand psyche, and it's become... I mean, they're pretty old jokes, but there was something about Billy's delivery and him as a person that you could never replicate that. So, you know, you shouldn't look for another Billy T, because Billy T was Billy T. You know what I mean?
The thing that always amuses me is that I can recall back at the time, white Liberals weren't too sure about Billy T because he was making jokes about Maori.
It was a Māori making jokes about Māori. It was,
yeah.
You know, but and I guess, you know, it was that secret laugh, you know, in a way. But now it's become part of our sort of culture that it's, you know, it's completely politically correct to laugh at Billy T. James, I think, now.
Yeah, I think it is, yes, yeah, officially.
I think so, yeah.
Yes. Dave, the other thing about Billy T is that, of course, he came from that variety and musical background. And
yeah.
there's quite often been a musical element in the New Zealand comedy that's worked best. Even Fred Dagg had a song, you look at the Concords now.
Yeah.
Is that something we should explore a little more?
Well, it's certainly something we should support, and yeah, I think there's a lot of a lot of comics are great musicians, not just New Zealand comics, Billy Colony, people like that, you know. Yeah, and I think a lot of, again, like I remember the Concords weren't trained. Oh, I think Brett was, but Jermaine certainly wasn't a trained classical musician or anything. But he just picked it up, and there's enormous talent, and you know, a lot of comics are fantastic singers and stuff. I think a good comic should certainly develop their music if they, you know, if they think they could do it. So yeah, sure.
How much of it with someone like Jermaine Clement from the Concords is just sheer talent? He just seems funny. I can recall being on a comedy quiz show with him. He hadn't done any homework. He walked in just before he went to air and he completely burgled the whole thing.
Sure, but people say that about a lot of very funny people, but most of them do a lot of work, and I just don't buy. I don't buy that everyone's innate. Of course, there's people with incredible talent, but if you're talented and lazy, you don't go as far as if you're talented and start working. And I think most of our really successful comics, they work hard. It's just you don't always hear about it. But yeah, I think they often work harder than they let on too.
And you have to in New Zealand. I think you can't. New Zealand has such a small comedy industry that our comics write and they do panel shows and they're on national radio that I think you have to be successful in New Zealand. You have to be quite well versed.
Are they career minded? Say when you get kids coming in to do their first 10 for $10 night. Are they coming in for a laugh, or how many of them are actually career-minded?
They're very serious. We run a program called Class Comedians where we teach high school students how to be comics and ruin the dreams of their parents. But there's the kids from the last couple of years, they've got sketches up on YouTube, they're doing their shows, they're selling out, they're working really, really hard because they want to be comedians. They spend all their time on YouTube, they talk to the internationals, they talk to the locals, and there really is that drive to be a comedian and be successful.
I was going to ask you about YouTube and the internet in general. So your view is that it's helping, because I've spoken to comedians, particularly international ones, who hate their stuff being up on YouTube.
Depends if you can have control over it. I think where the issues are if someone films a gig that doesn't go well and then puts it up. But there's sort of comedy websites like Funny or Die, which is run by Will Farrell and his writing partner, which is a sketch-based show for people to try things out. And it sort of probably would feed into the development of sketch shows because it's a really cheap medium to do. But I think it's the control that's sort of an issue.
Funny or Die was also the website that had the exclusive preview of the first episode of the second Flight of the Conchords series. So I thought that was a really clever use of the internet as well.
There's Funny or Die in America, and now there's Funny or Die in the UK, and it's like a comedy sketch version of YouTube, but it's run by comedians. So,
is the infrastructure here, do you think, to get young comedians to the kind of level where Paul and David are working, where they're useful on those kinds of projects? Are we missing some parts of the puzzle?
Yeah, I think the thing that we seem to be missing in New Zealand, that the UK and I think America does very well, is that producers and networks will go to the Edinburgh Festival and scout for talent, and then they'll do, say, a BBC radio show, or they'll do a radio pilot first. We seem to be quite focused on the, yes, you'll be funny, let's put you on stage and you'll have a primetime show, and there isn't a lot of development. So the BBC, the shows that come out of the UK tend to go to radio first, because Flight of the Conchords was a BBC radio show first, and then they get a pilot and then they go on from there. So there's time to develop those characters and time to develop the comedy.
Paul, one thing that James Griffin said to me once, who's the co-creator of Outrageous Fortune, he said the thing that never gets acknowledged is that when we look at something like Sex and the City, which is seen as a triumph of comedy writing, everyone involved with that show has failed. And they've learned from that previous failure and gone on and made a hit. The implication was that there's not that tolerance for failure and experiment in New Zealand television. Is that fair?
I think so. I think particularly with comedy of any other genre, things have to work immediately, and talk gets out pretty quick in New Zealand. So if there's for some reason in New Zealand, if a comedy's bad, and let's face it, there are some bad ones, people talk about it incessantly. The water cooler talk is just crazy.
Let's cut to the chase.
The show, Melody Rules. Actually, Melody Rules was an insignificant blip on New Zealand's radar. It was an overseas sort of produced show that has never been repeated. But we all know about it because it's held up. And I've seen 10 shows as bad as Melody Rules on American TV. American TV shows on my channels now that I'm watching at home. And I don't read the newspaper about this really bad American sitcom. And we're obsessed with if something's bad, it's like being a sheep rustler or a paedophile. You wrote for that show or something. I didn't write for Melody Rules. Well, but it's like, what's the... Yeah, I'm sure. Shut up, yeah. No, I didn't. But it's this obsession with failure. It's not. A good comic will say fail, learn to fail, learn to go out and take risks.
Go out there and die one night.
But what's become the obsession with I think a lot of people in the industry is, and I hate to use the word industry, is the sort of, oh God, it's not going to be Melody Rules, is it? No, it's okay. It's only going to be shitty and mediocre. That's okay. Oh, great. Oh, fantastic. It'll rate. The network will like it. Great. It's not going to be Melody, and I think that's a bad attitude.
Let's cut to the chase here. The show that kind of talk revolved around most recently was Welcome to Paradise, which clearly didn't work, but do you think the reaction against that was over the top?
Well, if you know, a TV show that doesn't work is not actually, it doesn't kill people. You know, it's just not very good. But what you get in New Zealand, because there's so little, I understand why people hate it. You get this sort of mania for who are responsible. Let's have the witch hunt. Whereas I mean, I've written things in the theatre that jokes. Even on a show that does well, you write a joke and a few people groan. So the next time it gets performed, you take out the joke because no one liked it. But, you know, you just don't get that chance in television. But I think we've sort of got to get over it.
Welcome to Paradise was unlucky because it was up against, you know, Flight of the Conchords. So it was like a before and after of New Zealand comedy. It was like how to get it not so good and how to get it so right. So it was unfortunate. But
everyone who's worked in, you know, TV has been, you know, involved in some dogs. But don't worry about it. Just get on to the next thing. And
I thought one interesting thing about Welcome to Paradise was some of the stuff that worked best, I gather, was brought to it by the young cast members themselves. You know, the elements of Josh Thompson's character that he brought over from being a stage comedian. So does that bring us back to that point of actually trusting the talent?
I think so. I think they're on stage every night. They're editing themselves every night. If it doesn't work, they'll drop it or they'll change it. And they learn, and you know, they've got this industry or this experience that they learn really quickly, and that no one really lets them take that across to television. I think there's sort of a mistrust that you haven't done it before, or you don't know funny, whereas they know funny every day of the week, 365 days of the year.
And more importantly, they know not funny.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that a good stand-up comedian doesn't need a good producer.
Yeah. No.
So where are we going with it? It's clear that live comedy is working. It's working for you. It's presumably working for the performers themselves. There is talent there. Is it going anywhere? Are we going to see, you know, to your knowledge, comedy on television again? What kind?
Well, we make 3 shows a year. We make 3 stand-up shows a year. So it would be great, I think, for us, for the comedy industry, to sort of somehow translate that into a panel show or a sketch show, or, you know, to see some sort of development and some trust, I think.
Overseas, the sketch shows and panel shows are just everywhere. Whereas for some reason in New Zealand, we sort of go through phases where networks think they're just a bit unfashionable. You know, there was a lot of sketch shows in the 80s and 90s, the Weekovits through to the skits and that kind of thing. And then suddenly networks just, it's a bit uncool. Whereas in every other country in the world, they have sketch shows, panel shows, developing young comedy talent as that bridge to sitcoms and films and that kind of thing. But for some reason, we're not doing them here. So I think, you know, more.
Last word, Dave?
Look, I don't know the future, but I just hope sort of young comics and stuff. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, but it's comedy. You know, when I see a comic with a card and a career plan and a website, something in me makes me reach for my revolver. What I love are comics that subvert the world, you know, and so you can win awards and be, you know, top rating and you're not funny. So for me, I just hope comics don't get too obsessed with a structure and an industry and have some fun.
It's all about
often the best fun is when you're starting out.
Right. Well, we'll bid farewell to this team and let Paul and Dave have a drink, and Kylie go off and run her festival, and return soon with the comedians themselves.